The billionaire CEO assumed she'd disappear. Years later, she didn't come alone. The conference hall went silent as the keynote speaker took the stage. Cameras flashed. Applause erupted. Dave Brennan stood there, composed, celebrated, untouchable. Then he saw her, Eliza Hart, standing near the back. Calm, changed. And beside her, someone he never expected. A young person whose stillness mirrored hers, whose presence rewrote everything he thought he knew about the past. Eliza caught his eye across the room. No anger, no plea for recognition, just awareness. And in that single moment, the assumption Dave had carried for nearly 2 decades shattered. Eliza had not disappeared. She had continued. And she had not come alone. Dave had believed Eliza would fade. Not immediately. Not with drama or spectacle. But the way people do when they are removed from the center of someone else's life. Gradually. Quietly. Without resistance. Dave told himself it was natural. Some chapters ended without needing to be revisited. Some people were meant to remain in the past. Eliza had been calm when Dave left. That was what Dave remembered most. No accusations thrown across the room. No desperate bargaining. No last attempt to make Dave understand what he was walking away from. That calm reassured Dave more than anger ever could. It confirmed what he wanted to believe. That Eliza would accept the ending. That she would rearrange her life somewhere far from his orbit. That silence meant peace. And for a while, it appeared that way. Eliza's name stopped coming up in conversations. Mutual contacts offered vague updates when Dave asked. Eliza moved cities. Changed jobs. Built something smaller, quieter, less visible. Dave stopped asking questions after the first year. Convinced that silence was confirmation. That distance was closure. Years passed. Nearly 2 decades of years. Dave's life expanded in ways he had planned for. New partnerships formed with precision. New visibility earned through calculated moves. A schedule packed tightly. Enough to prevent reflection. Dave spoke often about discipline. About knowing when to let go of distractions. About the importance of forward momentum. Dave never mentioned Eliza. Not to colleagues. Not to friends. Not even to himself in the quiet moments before sleep. Eliza had become a chapter Dave referenced only in abstract terms. A phase. A learning experience. Something that belonged to a version of himself he had outgrown 18 years ago. Then came the conference. An industry event large enough to feel impersonal. Safe. Familiar territory where Dave knew the rhythm, the faces, the unspoken rules. Dave arrived late, as he often did, confident that nothing unexpected could reach him there. The venue was crowded. Professional. Controlled. Dave was wrong. Dave saw Eliza during the mid-morning break. Standing near the back of the hall. Not networking. Not performing. Just listening. The recognition took a moment to register. Eliza looked different, but not transformed. More settled. Less careful. Her posture had changed. Not defensive anymore. Not braced for dismissal. And Eliza was not alone. At first, Dave thought the young person beside Eliza was perhaps an intern. Someone Eliza was mentoring. A recent graduate Eliza had brought along to the conference for professional development. The person looked to be around 19 or 20. Poised in a way that suggested comfort in professional spaces despite obvious youth. Not clinging to Eliza. Not hovering. Just present with quiet confidence. Then the person turned slightly. And the assumption Dave had carried for nearly 2 decades collapsed. Not violently. Not with sound or confrontation. Quietly. The way certainty dissolves when evidence contradicts belief. The resemblance was not obvious in the way people dramatize these moments. No mirror image revelation. No cinematic gasp. It lived in subtler details. In posture. In the way the head tilted when listening. In the stillness that suggested observation rather than performance. In gestures Dave recognized without being able to name where he had seen them before. In the shape of the eyes. In certain expressions. In small details that whispered familiarity. Dave's breath caught. No, Dave thought. No. But the evidence was there. Undeniable. Living and breathing and standing calmly beside Eliza like it was the most natural thing in the world. Eliza had not been alone all these years. Eliza had not disappeared into some quiet life of solitude and rebuilding. Eliza had continued. Moved forward. Built something Dave had never anticipated. Something that had nothing to do with Dave, but everything to do with his absence. Dave stood there, frozen, as the full weight of it settled over him. The young person beside Eliza was not an intern. The person was hers. In a way that transcended professional connection or chosen friendship. In a way that was fundamental, permanent, undeniable. Dave did the math instantly. 18 years. Nearly 19. The timeline aligned perfectly with when Dave had walked away. When he had told Eliza he needed to focus. When Eliza had said okay and left without fighting. Had Eliza known then? Or discovered it after? Either way, Eliza had made a choice. Not to tell Dave. Not to ask for his participation. Not to shape this person's life around Dave's absence with bitterness or demands. Eliza had brought the person here. To this conference. To this space where Dave was being celebrated and recognized. Not to make a statement. Not to confront Dave or demand anything. Simply because both of them belonged here. Because whatever work Eliza had been doing, whatever life Eliza had been building, it had led to this moment. And Eliza had not come alone. Had never been alone. Not really. While Dave was building his company and his reputation and his carefully curated life, Eliza had been building something else entirely. Something that did not require Dave's presence or his permission or his acknowledgement. Dave realized, with horrible clarity, that he had never mattered to Eliza's survival. Only to his own narrative. Dave had needed to believe Eliza would fade. Would struggle. Would remain somehow incomplete without him. It had allowed Dave to move forward without guilt. Without second thoughts. Without wondering what his decision had truly cost. But standing there, watching Eliza laugh at something the young person said, Dave understood how wrong he had been. Eliza caught Dave's eye then. Across the crowded hall. Through the noise and movement and professional performance. Their eyes met. And Eliza's expression did not change. No flash of anger. No hint of vindication. No silent question about whether Dave understood what he was seeing. Just awareness. Recognition. The kind of look you might give an old acquaintance. Someone you once knew. Someone who no longer had bearing on your present. Eliza did not owe Dave an explanation. Did not owe Dave introduction or acknowledgement or closure. The person beside Eliza noticed Dave's gaze. Followed it. Looked at Dave with mild curiosity. Not searching. Not asking silent questions about who Dave was or why he might matter. Just a brief glance. Neutral. Unbothered. Then the person returned to the conversation with Eliza. And Dave understood, with devastating clarity, that he had been erased. Not through anger or resentment or deliberate exclusion, but through simple irrelevance. Eliza had built a life. A family. A future. And it had nothing to do with Dave. The conference continued around Dave. Someone was asking Dave a question. Waiting for his response. Dave forced himself to focus. To smile. To offer some appropriate answer. To maintain the performance of being fully present. But part of Dave remained across the room. Watching Eliza. Watching the young person. Trying to reconcile what Dave was seeing with what he had believed for nearly 2 decades. Trying to understand how Dave had been so wrong about something so fundamental. The keynote session resumed. Dave found his seat. Applauded when appropriate. Took notes Dave would never reference. Engaged in the ritual of professional development while his mind spiraled through years of assumptions. Eliza had been calm when Dave left. Dave had interpreted that as acceptance. As agreement that ending things was right. As confirmation that Eliza would fade quietly from Dave's life and build something new somewhere else. But Eliza's calm had not been agreement. It had been decision. Eliza had looked at Dave that last evening. Had heard Dave's carefully rehearsed explanation about focus and trajectory and alignment. Had understood, in that moment, exactly who Dave was and what he was choosing. And whether Eliza knew then or discovered it later, Eliza had decided Dave was not worth including. Not because Eliza did not care, but because including Dave would have given him power he did not deserve. Would have centered Dave in a story that was no longer about him. So Eliza had said okay. And left. And built a life that proved Eliza had never needed Dave to begin with. The afternoon sessions blurred together. Dave went through the motions. Attended the required events. Made the expected appearances. But Dave's mind kept circling back to that moment in the hall. To Eliza's calm expression. To the easy way Eliza and the young person moved through the space. The person stayed beside Eliza for the rest of the day. Dave saw them during the next break. In the exhibition hall. At the closing reception. Always together. Always comfortable. Never seeking Dave out. Never avoiding him either. Just existing in the same professional space with complete indifference to Dave's presence. The young person looked so at ease. confident in a way that suggested being raised with security, with certainty of belonging. The person had Eliza's calm, Eliza's thoughtful way of listening before speaking, Eliza's quiet presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Around 19 or 20, Dave estimated. College age. Old enough to attend professional conferences. Young enough that the presence beside Eliza made sense as something more than professional connection. Too young to have memories of a man who had never been there to remember. Dave left before the final evening event. Told his team he had early meetings the next day. That Dave needed to prepare. They did not question it. Dave was known for his discipline, his focus, his ability to prioritize work above all else. In the car back to his hotel, Dave sat in silence. The city passed by outside the window, familiar and foreign at once. Dave thought about calling someone, a friend, a colleague, anyone who might help Dave process what he had just witnessed. But what would Dave say? That Dave had seen someone he left 18 years ago. That Eliza had not disappeared the way Dave assumed she would. That Eliza had brought someone to the conference whose very existence rewrote everything Dave believed about the past. That Eliza had continued without ever asking Dave's permission or seeking his acknowledgement. That Dave had been wrong. About Eliza. About what leaving meant. About what silence confirmed. That assumption had been easier than reckoning. The hotel room was cold when Dave entered it. Dave stood at the window looking out over the city. Different buildings than the ones visible from Dave's apartment. Different lights. Different angles. But the same essential emptiness. Dave had told himself for years that he made the right choice. That focus was necessary. That sacrifice was required. That some chapters needed to end so others could begin. But standing there, alone in a hotel room in a city that was not his, Dave wondered what he had actually built. A company. A reputation. A schedule that never allowed time for reflection. A life that looked impressive from the outside but felt increasingly hollow within it. Dave thought about Eliza. About the calm on Eliza's face when Dave told her he needed to focus 18 years ago. About the way Eliza had simply left. About all the years Dave spent believing Eliza had faded somewhere quiet and unremarkable. About the person Eliza had brought to the conference. The one who stood beside Eliza with easy confidence. Who had similar mannerisms. Similar stillness. Who existed as living proof that Eliza had not needed Dave. Had not waited for Dave. Had not shaped this life around Dave's absence. 18 years. 18 years of moments Dave never knew about. First words perhaps. First steps. First days of school. Graduations. Achievements. Struggles. All the moments that accumulate into a life. All of it happening without Dave knowing. Without Dave participating. Without Dave existing in any meaningful way. Dave had assumed disappearance was inevitable. That distance erased responsibility. That time absolved decision. That moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But Eliza had not disappeared. Eliza had continued. And Dave had lost something he had not known he was losing until it was already gone. The night stretched long and sleepless. Dave tried to work. To distract himself with emails and strategies and plans. But Dave's mind kept returning to that moment. To Eliza's expression. To the undeniable truth of what Dave had seen. By morning, exhaustion had settled into Dave's bones. Dave skipped breakfast. Checked out early. Flew home to the apartment with the impressive view and the carefully curated space that suddenly felt like evidence of everything Dave had chosen not to have. Dave tried to return to routine. Meetings. Projects. The endless demands of building something that required constant attention. But focus was harder now. Concentration fractured. Dave found himself staring at screens without processing information. Sitting in conversations without hearing words. Dave's team noticed. Asked if Dave was feeling alright. If something was wrong. If Dave needed to take time off. Dave assured them he was fine. Just tired from travel. From the intensity of the conference. From maintaining the pace Dave had set for himself. They accepted the explanation. Because Dave had trained them to accept his word without question. To trust that Dave knew his own limits. To believe that Dave was always in control. But Dave was not in control. Not anymore. The assumption that had structured years of Dave's life had collapsed. And in its place was a question Dave could not answer. What had Dave actually been building? And for whom? Days became weeks. Dave continued working. Continued making decisions. Continued showing up to meetings and presentations and strategy sessions. But something fundamental had shifted. Some essential certainty had eroded. Dave caught himself thinking about Eliza at odd moments. In the middle of negotiations, during presentations, late at night when sleep would not come, wondering where Eliza was, what Eliza was doing, whether the person Dave had seen at the conference had Eliza's smile, her laugh, her particular way of seeing the world. Dave wondered if the person knew about him, if Eliza had ever told the person, if Dave's absence had been explained or simply accepted as fact, if the young person had ever asked questions Eliza chose not to answer. Dave wondered if he mattered to the person at all, or if Dave was simply non-existent. Not even background information, just someone who had never been part of the story. Someone who existed only in Eliza's past before she became whoever she was to this person. The not knowing was worse than any answer could have been, because it confirmed what Dave had seen in Eliza's expression at the conference. That indifference, that complete lack of need for closure or explanation or acknowledgement. Eliza had moved on so thoroughly that Dave's presence was unremarkable. Dave was not a wound, not even a scar, just someone Eliza used to know. Someone who had made a choice that no longer mattered because Eliza had made her own choices in response. And those choices had proven more durable than Davis. Dave thought about reaching out to Eliza, considered finding Eliza's contact information, writing an email, asking for a conversation, offering some belated acknowledgement of what Dave had seen. But what would Dave say? I saw you at the conference and realized I was wrong about everything I believed. I assumed you would disappear, but you built a life instead. I need you to know that I understand now what I could not understand then. Every possible message felt like centering himself, making Eliza responsible for Dave's realization, asking Eliza to manage Dave's discomfort, demanding emotional labor from someone who owed Dave nothing. So Dave did not reach out, because some realizations arrive too late to be useful to anyone but yourself. The weeks turned into months. Dave's company continued growing. New projects launched. New partnerships formed. Success piled upon success in ways that should have felt satisfying. But the satisfaction was hollow. Every achievement felt like evidence of what Dave had prioritized. Every recognition felt like confirmation of what Dave had sacrificed. Every moment of celebration was shadowed by the awareness of what Dave had assumed away. Dave started declining some invitations. Not all of them, but enough that people noticed. Enough that Dave's team asked if his priorities were shifting. If Dave was considering changes, if something was wrong. Dave told them he was reevaluating, taking time to assess what came next, making space for reflection. All the language people use when they are questioning foundations they previously thought were solid. They did not push, because Dave's track record had earned him the benefit of doubt, because Dave was allowed to evolve, because people with success have the luxury of introspection. But alone, in the apartment that felt increasingly like a monument to wrong choices, Dave faced the truth. Dave had believed that leaving was necessary, that focus required elimination, that building something significant meant sacrificing everything else. That clarity came from cutting away distractions. But what if Dave had been wrong? What if the distraction had been the only thing that mattered? What if Dave had walked away from the only person who had ever seen him as someone other than what he built? What if Eliza's calm that final evening had been her final act of grace? Letting Dave believe his choice was mutual when really Eliza was simply choosing not to tell him. Choosing to build her life without the complication of someone who had already demonstrated what mattered to him. Dave thought about time. About all the years that had passed. 18 years. Nearly 2 decades. All the years Eliza had spent building something Dave never anticipated. All the years the young person had been growing. Learning. Becoming someone independent of Dave's knowledge or participation. Time Dave could not reclaim. Moments Dave would never witness. A life that had unfolded without Dave because Dave had decided to leave. The weight of it was crushing. Not because Eliza had punished Dave. Not because Eliza had sought revenge or made Dave's absence painful. But because Eliza had simply continued. Had proven that life went on. That people adapted. That love did not require Dave's participation to exist. That Dave had been replaceable after all. Not in some petty, vindictive way, but in the most fundamental sense. Eliza had needed someone. And when Dave chose not to be that person, Eliza had built a life anyway. Had found strength Dave never credited her with. Had proven more capable than Dave had ever believed. Had raised someone who looked secure and confident and completely unburdened by Dave's absence. And Eliza had done it all without ever asking Dave to witness it. That was the part that undid Dave. Not that Eliza had moved on, but that Eliza had moved on so completely that even seeing Dave again at the conference had not disrupted Eliza's peace. Had not required explanation or justification or any acknowledgement beyond brief eye contact. Eliza had released Dave so thoroughly that Dave no longer existed in Eliza's present tense, only in past tense. Someone Eliza used to know, before everything that mattered. The realization sat in Dave's chest like a stone. Heavy, immovable, impossible to ignore. Dave had assumed he was the main character of his own story. That Dave's decisions shaped outcomes. That Dave's presence or absence determined what was possible for other people. But Dave had been wrong. Eliza was the main character of her own story. And Dave had been a minor character who exited early. Whose absence changed the plot, but did not end it. Who was forgotten, perhaps, or never mentioned. Not needed. Not essential to the narrative that continued after Dave's departure. The autumn turned to winter. Dave's apartment grew colder. Dave turned up the heat, but the chill remained. Something internal. Something no thermostat could adjust. Dave thought about calling old friends. People who had known Dave and Eliza both 18 years ago. Who might offer perspective or insight. Who might help Dave understand how to live with this knowledge. But what would Dave ask them? How do you reconcile being wrong about something fundamental? How do you accept that you cost yourself something irreplaceable? How do you move forward when you realize the path you chose leads nowhere you actually want to go? There were no good answers. Only the slow, grinding work of sitting with consequence. Of accepting that some mistakes cannot be fixed. That some losses are permanent. That some assumptions cost more than you understood when you made them. Dave had believed silence meant disappearance. That distance was erasure. That absence absolved. But silence had meant continuation elsewhere. Distance had meant growth Dave did not witness. Absence had meant life unfolding without Dave's input or approval. And now Dave stood in the center of everything he had built and felt nothing but the echo of what he had lost. The conference had been months ago, but the image remained vivid. Eliza's calm expression. The easy way Eliza moved through that space. The young person beside Eliza. Around 19 years old. Confident. Secure. Living proof of everything Dave had been wrong about. Dave did not know the person's name. Did not know what the person studied or cared about or dreamed of becoming. Did not know if the person was kind or funny or struggling with something not told to anyone. Did not know what the person thought about when sleep would not come or what made the person laugh until breathing became difficult. Did not know if the person played sports, liked music, was good at math or better at writing, had friends who cared deeply, had ever been hurt, knew how to change a tire or cook a meal or any of the 1,000 small skills that get passed down. Did not know anything about a person who existed completely outside Dave's awareness for 19 years. That was the cost. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just the quiet, accumulating weight of all the things Dave would never know. All the moments Dave had forfeited before he even knew such moments existed. All the connections Dave had severed when he decided focus was more important than presence. When Dave walked away without knowing what walking away would mean. The year was ending. Dave received invitations to holiday parties, industry events, celebrations marking another year of success. Dave attended some, declined others, moved through them with practiced professionalism when Dave did go. But the performance was wearing thin. People could sense it, could see that something had shifted, that the man who spoke so confidently about discipline and focus now seemed uncertain, distracted, present in body but absent in some essential way. They asked if Dave was all right. Dave told them he was fine, just tired, just reassessing priorities, just taking time to think about what came next. All true, none of it adequate to explain the fundamental upheaval happening beneath the surface. On the last day of the year, Dave stood at his apartment window watching the city prepare for celebration. Lights strung between buildings, people gathering in groups. The anticipation of new beginnings that came with arbitrary calendar designations. Dave thought about resolutions, about the promises people made to themselves when one year ended and another began, about the belief that change was possible, that patterns could be broken, that awareness could lead to transformation. Dave did not make resolutions, because what Dave needed to change could not be changed. What Dave needed to fix had broken 18 years ago. What Dave needed to understand Dave was only now beginning to see. Dave had assumed Eliza would disappear. And in that assumption, Dave had given himself permission to move forward without looking back, to build success without counting cost, to measure his life in achievements that could be quantified and displayed and celebrated by people who did not know what Dave had sacrificed to earn them, what Dave had walked away from before even knowing it existed. But Eliza had not disappeared. Eliza had continued. And in continuing, Eliza had proven that assumption was not prophecy. That Dave's belief about what would happen did not determine what actually happened. That life unfolded according to laws Dave did not write and could not control. The new year arrived with fireworks and noise and celebration. Dave watched it from his window, alone, in the apartment Dave had chosen for its view, in the life Dave had built on the foundation of walking away. And for the first time in 18 years, Dave allowed himself to feel the full weight of what that choice had cost him. Not in abstract terms, not in the language of trajectory and focus and alignment, but in human terms, in the specific, irreplaceable reality of a person Dave had known. A connection Dave had severed. A life that had continued without Dave because Dave had decided to leave. The cost was not success. Dave had achieved everything Dave set out to achieve. The cost was knowing what Dave had given up to get it. And understanding, far too late, that some things matter more than the life you build when you build it alone. If you found this story moving, if it made you think about the assumptions you carry and the people you've let fade from your life, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you never miss stories that challenge how we see success, sacrifice, and the lies we convince ourselves we've left behind. The winter passed in a blur of motion without movement. Dave continued showing up. To meetings. To strategy sessions. To the endless parade of obligations that came with being the face of a successful company. But something fundamental had fractured. Some internal mechanism that had always driven him forward now stuttered and stalled. His assistant, Rebecca, noticed first. She had worked with Dave for 6 years, had learned to anticipate his needs before Dave himself recognized them, had developed an instinct for his moods, his patterns, his unspoken preferences. She knocked on Dave's office door one February afternoon. Dave looked up from his laptop. He had been staring at the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes without processing a single number. Rebecca said she wanted to discuss his schedule. Dave told her to come in. Rebecca sat across from his desk with her tablet, the way she always did. But instead of launching into logistics, Rebecca just looked at Dave for a long moment. She asked if Dave was all right. Dave gave his standard response. Tired from travel. Managing a lot of moving pieces. Nothing unusual. Rebecca did not look convinced. She said Dave had canceled 4 dinners in the past 3 weeks. Had cut short 2 investor meetings. Had declined 3 speaking opportunities that would normally excite him. She said this gently, without accusation, just observation. Dave told Rebecca he was fine, just reassessing priorities, making space for reflection. The same words Dave had been using for months. The same explanation that sounded increasingly hollow each time Dave spoke it. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then she said something that caught Dave off guard. She said that in 6 years of working together, she had never seen Dave turn down an opportunity to speak. That ambition had always been Dave's defining characteristic. That watching Dave pull back now felt like watching someone disappear in slow motion. Dave sat very still. Rebecca apologized immediately, said she had overstepped. That Dave's personal life was not her business. That she would adjust his schedule however Dave wanted. But the words had already landed. Disappear in slow motion. That was what Dave had believed Eliza would do. Fade gradually. Become less substantial. Eventually cease to matter in any meaningful way. But Eliza had not disappeared. Dave had, or was disappearing, piece by piece, meeting by meeting, day by day, while Eliza moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had built something real. Dave told Rebecca to keep his schedule light for the next month. Rebecca made a note on her tablet, asked if there was anything else Dave needed. Dave shook his head. Rebecca left quietly, closing the door behind her with careful precision. Dave returned his attention to the spreadsheet, but the numbers still meant nothing. That evening, Dave did something he had not done in years. He left the office at 5, walked home instead of calling a car, moved through the city as the workday ended and people spilled out of buildings into the cold evening air. Couples walking hand in hand, parents collecting children from daycare, groups of co-workers heading to happy hour, all of them moving with purpose, with destination, with people waiting for them somewhere. Dave walked alone. had always walked alone. By choice, he had told himself. Because focus required solitude. Because building something significant meant sacrificing the comfortable distractions of ordinary life. But watching the city move around him, Dave wondered if that had ever been true, or if it had just been easier to believe. Dave reached his building as the sun set behind the skyline. The doorman greeted Dave by name, asked how his day had been. Dave offered a vague positive response and moved toward the elevator. The apartment was dark when Dave entered. He did not turn on the lights immediately, just stood in the entryway letting his eyes adjust. The space was exactly as Dave had left it that morning. Clean, organized, impressive in the way spaces are when they are designed to project success rather than accommodate living. Dave moved to the windows. The city glowed below. Millions of lights representing millions of lives. People cooking dinner, helping with homework, fighting about finances, making love, making mistakes, building the messy, complicated, beautiful fabric of human connection. Dave stood above it all, separate, removed, safe in his tower of glass and steel and carefully curated emptiness. He thought about Eliza, not the version of Eliza Dave had known, but the version Dave had seen at the conference. Settled, confident, accompanied by someone whose existence rewrote everything Dave thought he understood about the years after he left. Dave wondered where Eliza lived now, what her home looked like, whether it was large or small, whether it felt like a space designed to impress or a space built for living, whether there were photographs on the walls, whether dinner happened around a table, whether conversations flowed easily or required effort, whether Eliza ever thought about Dave, or whether Dave had faded from Eliza's memory the way he had assumed Eliza would fade from his. The thought was unbearable, not because Dave wanted Eliza to suffer, but because the alternative was worse. That Eliza had simply moved on, had built a full, rich life that had no room for regret about what Dave had ended. That Dave's absence had been an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. That Dave had mattered so little that forgetting him had been easy. Dave turned away from the window, made himself dinner from ingredients that had been delivered that morning, ate standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone felt too pathetic, cleaned up with mechanical efficiency. Then Dave did something he had been avoiding for months. He opened his laptop and searched for Eliza. It took less than a minute to find her. Eliza had a professional profile on the industry networking site. Her photograph showed the same settled confidence Dave had seen at the conference. The summary described her current position. Senior Director of Strategic Planning at a mid-sized firm Dave vaguely recognized. Based in Portland. Focused on sustainable business practices and long-term growth strategies. Portland. Dave had never been to Portland. Had never had reason to visit. It felt impossibly far from the city where Dave had built his empire. Far enough that running into Eliza accidentally would be impossible, which meant Eliza seeing Dave at that conference had been intentional. She had traveled, had registered, had attended knowing Dave would be there, had brought the young person beside her into a space where encountering Dave was inevitable. Not to make a statement. Dave understood that now. But because she belonged there. Because her work mattered. Because years had passed and Eliza had earned her place in their industry regardless of Dave's presence. Dave scrolled through Eliza's profile. Her experience was impressive. Positions at 3 different companies. Each role showing growth. Responsibility. The kind of steady upward trajectory that came from competence rather than flash. References praised her strategic thinking. Her ability to build consensus. Her focus on sustainable solutions rather than short-term gains. Everything Dave had once dismissed as lack of ambition. There were no personal details. No mention of family. No photographs beyond the professional headshot. No indicators of the person Dave had seen at the conference. Eliza had maintained clear boundaries between professional and personal. Had not offered her private life for public consumption. Dave respected that, even as he desperately wanted to know more. He closed the laptop. Sat in the dark apartment feeling the weight of everything Dave had convinced himself did not matter. All the moments Dave had traded for meetings. All the connections Dave had severed for focus. All the assumptions Dave had made about what success required. And what it cost. Dave's phone buzzed with a notification. An investor wanted to schedule a call. A conference organizer was requesting confirmation for an event in 6 months. A journalist was asking for comment on an industry development. The world kept demanding Dave's attention, kept insisting that what Dave had built mattered, that his opinions were valuable, that his presence was essential. But sitting alone in his apartment, Dave wondered if any of it was true, or if he had just been very good at convincing people that emptiness was achievement. The next morning, Dave woke to find an email from an old friend, Damien, someone Dave had known since college, someone who had been at Dave's first apartment when Dave was building his company from nothing, someone who had seen Dave with Eliza before Dave decided she was a distraction. The email was brief. Damien was going to be in the city for work, wanted to grab dinner if Dave had time, suggested a restaurant they used to frequent years ago, before Dave's schedule became too full for spontaneous meals with old friends. Dave almost declined. The automatic response formed in his mind. Too busy. Too many commitments. Maybe next time. But Dave remembered Rebecca's words. About disappearing in slow motion. About pulling back from everything that had once defined him. Dave replied, accepting the invitation. They met on a Thursday evening. The restaurant was unchanged. Same worn booths. Same menu that had not been updated in a decade. Same comfortable atmosphere that felt like a refuge from the polished performance of Dave's usual dining spots. Damien was already there when Dave arrived. He stood to greet Dave. Damien looked older, softer around the edges. The kind of aging that comes from contentment rather than stress. They shook hands, sat down, ordered drinks. Small talk came easily at first. Damien's work, his company's latest projects, industry gossip they both found mildly interesting. The comfortable rhythm of two people who had known each other long enough that silence was not awkward. Then Damien asked how Dave was really doing. Dave gave his standard response. Busy, managing growth, considering next steps. The practiced answer that revealed nothing.
I think this is the start of something great.
I'll certainly drink to that.
Damien looked at Dave with the same expression Rebecca had worn in his office. Concern, curiosity, the sense that something important was being left unsaid. Damien said Dave looked tired. Not physically, but in some deeper way. Like Dave was carrying weight that was becoming too heavy to manage alone. Dave considered deflecting again, offering another vague reassurance. Changing the subject. Maintaining the performance of being fine that Dave had perfected over months of practice. But something in Damien's expression stopped him. Maybe it was the history between them. The years before Dave became someone who measured conversations by their strategic value. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the simple relief of being seen. Dave told Damien about the conference. About seeing Eliza. About the young person beside her. About the assumption that had collapsed in a single moment of recognition. About the months since then. About the growing certainty that Dave had made a catastrophic mistake years ago and was only now understanding its full cost. Damien listened without interrupting. Did not offer empty reassurances. Did not rush to tell Dave he was wrong. Just listened with the kind of attention that had become rare in Dave's carefully curated life. When Dave finished, Damien was quiet for a long moment. Then Damien said he remembered when Dave and Eliza were together. Said he had liked Eliza. Thought she was good for Dave. Thought Dave seemed more human when Eliza was around. More connected to something beyond work. Dave asked what Damien meant by more human. Damien considered the question carefully. He said that Dave had always been ambitious. Driven. Focused in ways that were impressive but also slightly frightening. Like Dave was running towards something or away from something and could not afford to stop long enough to figure out which. But when Eliza was around, Damien said, Dave seemed to pause sometimes. To exist in moments rather than constantly planning the next one. To laugh at things that were not strategic. To be present in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. Then Dave ended things with Eliza. And Damien watched Dave disappear into work. Become more successful. More recognized. More everything except happy. Damien said he had wondered if Dave would ever notice. The cost of what Dave had chosen. The emptiness at the center of all that achievement. The way Dave had built a life that looked impressive from the outside, but was hollow within it. Dave asked if Damien thought it was too late. Damien asked what Dave meant. Dave said to fix it. To reach out to Eliza. To acknowledge what Dave had seen at the conference and what it meant. To offer some belated understanding even if nothing could be repaired. Damien was quiet for a long time. Then he said he did not know. That some things could not be fixed. That some choices had permanent consequences. That time did not always heal. Sometimes time just revealed what was already broken. But Damien also said that understanding was valuable even when it came too late to change outcomes. That reckoning mattered even when redemption was impossible. That Dave sitting here recognizing the cost of his assumptions was better than Dave continuing to pretend his assumptions had not cost anything. The conversation shifted after that to lighter topics, shared memories, the comfortable territory of old friendship. They finished dinner, promised to stay in better touch, parted with the understanding that some things had been said that needed saying. Dave walked home through the cold evening. The city felt different somehow. Not changed, but seen differently. All those lights and all those windows representing lives Dave had never considered. Connections Dave had never prioritized. Moments Dave had traded for meetings that no longer felt important. Back in his apartment, Dave stood at the window again. But instead of feeling above it all, Dave felt separate from it. Disconnected. Like someone looking at life through glass rather than living it. Dave thought about what Damien had said. About seeming more human when Eliza was around. About disappearing into work. About the cost of choices finally becoming visible. All of it was true. Dave had spent years believing that success required sacrifice. That building something significant meant eliminating distractions. That focus was the price of achievement. But what if Dave had been measuring the wrong things? What if the distraction had been the only thing worth building? What if achievement without connection was just elaborate emptiness? What if Dave had sacrificed the only thing that made success meaningful? The weeks that followed were strange. Dave continued working, continued making decisions, continued showing up to the endless obligations that came with his position. But something had shifted fundamentally. Dave found himself questioning things he had never questioned before. Whether a meeting was necessary, whether a trip was valuable, whether the constant motion was taking Dave anywhere he actually wanted to go. His team noticed. In a quarterly review, Dave's COO, Jennifer, asked if Dave was considering stepping back. The question was asked carefully, without judgment, but with genuine concern about what Dave's shifting engagement meant for the company. Dave said he was not stepping back, just reevaluating what forward meant, just considering whether the trajectory Dave had set years ago still made sense, just wondering if growth for its own sake was actually growth at all. Jennifer nodded slowly. She said the company was stable, that systems were in place, that Dave had built something that could function without Dave's constant attention. That maybe it was time for Dave to consider what he wanted his life to look like rather than what he thought it should look like. The permission surprised Dave. He had assumed that pulling back would be seen as weakness, as failure, as abdication of responsibility. But Jennifer was offering something else. The possibility that Dave had earned the right to choose differently. That success included the option to redefine what success meant. Dave thanked Jennifer for her candor. Said he would think about what she said. Said he appreciated her managing so much of the operational burden. Said the company was in good hands. Jennifer smiled. She said it had been in good hands for a while. That Dave had been holding on tighter than necessary. That letting go did not mean abandoning. That trust was also a form of leadership. After Jennifer left, Dave sat in his office for a long time, thinking about control. About the illusion that Dave's constant attention was what held everything together. About the possibility that Dave had been using work to avoid confronting what work was helping him avoid. That evening, Dave made a decision. He opened his laptop, found Eliza's professional profile again, looked at her contact information. Her email address was listed publicly. Professional. Available to anyone who wanted to reach out. Dave stared at the blank email draft for over an hour. What could Dave possibly say? What would not sound like excuses or justification or a demand for absolution? What would acknowledge the truth without centering Dave's realization as if it mattered more than the years Eliza had spent building a life without him? Dave typed and deleted a dozen opening lines. Each one felt wrong. Too formal. Too casual. Too apologetic. Too presumptuous. Too focused on Dave's feelings rather than Eliza's reality. Finally, Dave closed the laptop without sending anything. Because some conversations could not be had through email. Some reckonings required more than words typed in the safety of distance. And some realizations had to be lived with rather than resolved. Dave did not know if he would ever speak to Eliza again. Did not know if Eliza would want to hear from him. Did not know if anything Dave could say would matter to someone who had moved on so completely. But Dave knew that assumption had cost him everything that mattered. And that understanding that cost was the beginning of something. Not redemption. Not resolution. But reckoning. The kind that changes you even when it cannot change what you have done. Spring arrived slowly. The city thawed. Trees budded. People emerged from winter hibernation with the renewed energy that comes with longer days and warmer air. Dave watched the change from his office window. Noticed things he had not noticed before. The way light shifted throughout the day. The patterns of people moving through the streets below. The small moments of connection that happened constantly if you paid attention. Dave started leaving the office earlier. Not to go anywhere specific. Just to walk. To be present in the city rather than above it. To remember what it felt like to exist in the world rather than just pass through it. One evening in late April, Dave found himself in a neighborhood he rarely visited. Residential. Tree-lined. The kind of area where people lived rather than worked. Children played in a small park. Parents watched from benches. Dogs pulled at leashes. Normal life unfolding in all its messy, beautiful ordinariness. Dave sat on a bench at the edge of the park. Watching. Not in a creepy way. Just observing. Trying to understand what he had been missing. Trying to see what Eliza had built that Dave had dismissed as distraction. A child fell off the swings. Not badly. Just a tumble that resulted in scraped hands and surprised tears. A woman rushed over. Scooped the child up. Checked for injuries. Offered comfort and reassurance. The child's tears stopped quickly. The woman set the child down. The child ran back to the swings. The woman returned to her bench. The moment passed like thousands of moments pass every day. Unremarkable except for the care within it. Dave thought about the person he had seen at the conference. The one standing beside Eliza. The one whose existence Dave had not anticipated. Had there been moments like this? Had Eliza rushed to comfort scraped knees? Had ordinary moments of care accumulated into the easy confidence Dave had witnessed? All of it happening without Dave. All of it proving that life continued. That people built families and found joy and created meaning without needing Dave's participation or permission or acknowledgement. The realization was not new. Dave had understood it intellectually for months. But sitting in that park, watching life unfold in all its ordinary complexity, the understanding moved from his head to somewhere deeper. To the place where regret lives. Where the weight of wrong choices settles permanently. Where understanding comes too late to matter, but must be carried anyway. Dave left the park as the sun set. Walked home through streets filled with people returning from work. Stopping at markets. Picking up children. Meeting friends. All the small rituals of connection that Dave had convinced himself were distractions from more important things. Back in his apartment, Dave made a different decision than the one he had made months ago. He did not open Eliza's profile. Did not draft an email. Did not try to reach across the distance Dave had created. Instead, Dave accepted it. The loss. The cost. The permanent consequence of assumptions Dave had made when he believed walking away was progress rather than abdication. Eliza had continued. Had built a life that was full and meaningful and complete without Dave. Had proven more capable than Dave had ever credited. Had demonstrated that she had never needed Dave's permission to thrive. And Dave had to live with that. Not as tragedy, but as truth. The kind of truth that reshapes you from the inside. That teaches you what matters through the experience of losing it. That forces growth through the grinding process of regret. Dave did not know what came next. Did not know if he could build something different. Something that valued connection over achievement. Presence over productivity. The messy complexity of human relationship over the clean metrics of professional success. But Dave knew he could not continue as he had been. Could not keep disappearing into work. Could not keep measuring life in quarterly results and keynote speeches and board positions. Could not keep pretending that the life Dave had built was the life Dave actually wanted. The change would be slow. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just the patient work of rebuilding assumptions from the ground up. Of learning to value different things. Of measuring success by different metrics. Dave did not know if it would be enough. If understanding could lead to transformation. If recognizing cost could prevent future mistakes. If regret could be generative rather than just destructive. But Dave knew this. Eliza had not disappeared. And Dave could not pretend anymore that distance was resolution. That silence was peace. That walking away had been anything other than the beginning of slowly losing himself. Summer arrived with heat and noise and the particular energy of a city fully awake. Dave's company announced strong quarterly results. Media coverage was positive. Investors were pleased. By every external measure, Dave was succeeding beyond what most people achieved in a lifetime. But sitting in his apartment on a July evening, Dave felt the hollowness more acutely than ever. All that achievement, all that recognition, all that carefully constructed success, and no one to share it with. No one who knew Dave beyond what he had built. No one who had chosen to stay through the difficult process of becoming rather than just admiring the finished product. Dave's phone buzzed. A notification about another conference. This one in the fall. An invitation to keynote again. The kind of opportunity Dave would have accepted immediately a year ago. Dave stared at the invitation for a long moment, then deleted it. Not because Dave was stepping back from work, but because standing on stages talking about success felt obscene when Dave was only beginning to understand how thoroughly he had failed at the things that actually mattered. The months continued passing. Dave made small changes, turned down more invitations, took longer walks, had dinner with Damien regularly, started therapy, though he told almost no one, began the slow, unglamorous work of figuring out who Dave was beyond what he had achieved. It was not dramatic. No grand transformation. No sudden enlightenment. Just patient excavation of assumptions Dave had built his life on. Just careful examination of what Dave actually wanted versus what Dave thought he should want. In September, Dave attended a different conference. Smaller, more focused, less about personal recognition and more about collaborative problem solving. Dave went as an attendee rather than a speaker. Sat in sessions. Took notes. Listened more than he talked. Dave did not see Eliza. Had not expected to. The conference was regional, focused on issues specific to Dave's city. Eliza was in Portland, building her life, moving through her world, existing completely independent of Dave's awareness or participation. But Dave thought about Eliza often, not with longing, not with hope for reconciliation, but with a kind of grateful acknowledgement that Eliza had taught Dave something essential even in leaving. That her refusal to fade had forced Dave to confront assumptions he might have carried forever. That her continuation without Dave had been its own kind of gift. The gift of truth. Even when truth was painful. Even when truth arrived too late to change outcomes. Even when truth just meant living with the weight of what you had chosen and what that choice had cost. On the anniversary of the conference where Dave had seen Eliza, Dave did something unexpected. He wrote a letter. Not an email. An actual letter. On paper, the kind of communication that required thought and care and the inability to delete and revise endlessly. Dave did not write to Eliza. That felt too presumptuous, too focused on Dave's need for resolution rather than Eliza's right to continue without interruption. Instead, Dave wrote to himself, to the version of Dave who had stood in his apartment years ago and told Eliza he needed to focus. To the man who had believed that walking away was wisdom rather than cowardice. To the person Dave had been before understanding what assumptions cost. Dave wrote about what he had learned. That silence was not disappearance. That distance was not resolution. That some people do not fade just because you stop looking at them. That life continues in ways you cannot predict or control. That absence does not absolve. That assumptions are comfortable until reality proves them catastrophically wrong. Dave wrote about the conference. About seeing Eliza. About the young person beside her. About the moment everything Dave believed shattered quietly. About the months since then. About the slow, painful work of sitting with consequence. About learning to measure life differently. Dave wrote about regret. Not the self-indulgent kind that demands absolution, but the productive kind that teaches you what matters through the experience of losing it. The kind that reshapes priorities. That forces growth. That makes you different even when it cannot change what you have done. When Dave finished writing, he folded the letter carefully, put it in an envelope, addressed it to himself, placed it in his desk drawer. Not to send, not to read again, just to mark the moment, to acknowledge that understanding had arrived. That change had begun. That Dave was different now than he had been. Not better necessarily, just different, more aware, more honest about cost, more willing to question assumptions, more interested in building a life that felt full rather than just looked successful. Dave did not know if he would ever see Eliza again. Did not know if their paths would cross at another conference. Did not know if Eliza ever thought about Dave. Did not know if the person Dave had seen beside Eliza knew Dave existed. But Dave knew this. Eliza had not disappeared. She had continued. Had built something real and lasting and meaningful. Had proven more capable than Dave had ever believed. Had demonstrated that she never needed Dave to be complete. And Dave had to honor that. Not by reaching out. Not by inserting himself back into Eliza's narrative, but by learning from what Eliza had taught him through her absence, by measuring success differently, by valuing different things, by building a life that was about more than achievement. The letter sat in Dave's desk drawer, a private reckoning, a quiet acknowledgement, a marker of the moment when assumption gave way to understanding. And understanding, however late it arrived, became the foundation for living differently. Not perfectly, not without continued mistakes and missteps and moments of forgetting what Dave had learned, but with awareness, with humility, with the hard-earned knowledge that some people do not disappear just because you stop looking. The person continues. And the person's continuation, the person's thriving, the person's building of a life that does not include you. That is not tragedy. That is grace. The grace of people who refuse to be diminished by your absence, who build anyway, who prove that nobody ever needed you to begin with. And if you are fortunate, if you are paying attention, if you are willing to sit with the discomfort of being wrong, that grace teaches you what you should have known all along, that the only things worth building are the things that value people over achievement, connection over control, presence over productivity. That success means nothing if you are successful alone. That assumptions about how people will respond to your choices are just stories you tell yourself to make walking away feel like progress. And that sometimes the most important lessons arrive too late to change what you have done, but just in time to change who you become. Dave stood at his apartment window as winter approached again. 1 year since the conference. 1 year since seeing Eliza. 1 year since the assumption that had structured years of Dave's life collapsed in a single moment of recognition. The city glowed below. All those lights. All those lives. All those people building meaning in ways Dave was only beginning to understand. Dave did not know what his future looked like. Did not know if he would ever build the kind of connection he had walked away from. Did not know if understanding cost was enough to prevent future mistakes. Did not know if he could transform from someone who measured life in achievements to someone who measured it in presence. But Dave knew this. He was different now. Not redeemed. Not absolved. Not forgiven. Because there was nothing to forgive except his own assumptions. Just different. More aware of cost. More honest about what mattered. More willing to question the stories he told himself about success and sacrifice and what building a life actually required. And somewhere, in a city Dave had never visited, Eliza was continuing. Building. Growing. Existing completely independent of Dave's awareness or approval or participation. Not because she had disappeared, but because she never had. She had just continued without him. And that continuation, that refusal to fade, that quiet proof that life unfolds according to laws Dave did not write. That was the lesson, the one Dave would carry forward, the one that would shape every choice that came next, the one that arrived too late to change the past, but just in time to reshape the future. Some people do not disappear. Some people continue. And their continuation, whether you witness it or not, whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you learn from it or not, that is the truth you build your life on, or the truth that breaks you. Dave chose the former, not because it was easy, but because Eliza had proven that continuing was possible, that building without permission was achievable, that thriving despite absence was not just survivable, but transformative. And if Eliza could do that, if Eliza could take Dave's walking away and use it as foundation rather than obstacle, then maybe Dave could take this understanding and build something different. Something that valued what he had learned through losing it. Something that honored Eliza's continuation by finally understanding what it meant. Not to be the center of someone else's story, but to be worthy of inclusion in it. Even if that inclusion never came. Even if Dave never saw Eliza again. Even if the person beside her never learned Dave's name. The lesson remained. And the lesson was enough. This story is about the assumptions we carry and the cost we pay when reality proves us wrong. If it made you think about the people you've let fade and the stories you tell yourself about why that was necessary, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss stories that challenge how we measure success and what we sacrifice to achieve it. Because some lessons arrive too late to change what we've done, but just in time to change who we become.